Well, welcome everyone. As you're joining the session here, want to make sure you're at the right place. This is aligning and evaluating state level initiatives with Pbis. And we're going to give you just a few minutes to come into the room. As you're entering the room, again, this is the aligning and evaluating state level initiatives with Pbis. My name is Steve Goodman, and I've got the wonderful opportunity here to present with my good friend Justin Pulios. And then we've got a wonderful tech support from Dama in the background, and so she's helping us move forward as well. So thank you, Dama. As you come in, just have a few housekeeping slides here for you, because you may or may not have been with the conference so far. And if you haven't been, there's some wonderful sessions that were earlier that will be available through recording, so please take advantage of that. So again, this is the aligning and evaluating state level initiatives with Pbis. And my slides are going a little slow here, so sorry about that. We want to just review, because again, you may be just joining us, that we have virtual forum expectations of being responsible, being respectful, being safe. And you can see overall for the event, as well as for the chat and polls, that we want to make sure that we have engagement, but really hope to keep on topic and be positive and supportive of each other during our time together. So I'm going to move on to the next slide here. So you should be able to find your registered sessions in Pathable, and in your personal schedule, you'll be able to see what you signed up for, and then you can select the different items. If you are navigating the session page, you can navigate through session details. You can look at joint sessions going on. You can interact through chat, polls, and upload files. For this session, we will just be using the chat. And please feel free to use the chat and type in questions, comments as we move forward. It's 100 of our closest friends here, so you're all, we're excited to be here with you all. And for the chat, you can use the chat for engaging other participants or commenting to make comments of what we're talking about. You can also provide questions and answers under the polls. So if you want to submit a question here, we can go there and look at the chat as well as polls. And if by chance you accidentally navigate away, just go back to the Pathable platform, and you can find at the navigation tools at the top, you can navigate right back down to where we are and choose the session and join us again. And there's always support available. So at the Pathable platform, when you look under the blue menu, you'll see a help desk option. So you can go ahead and click on that. That will help you to do some things. You can also move forward by typing some things in the chat if you need help as well. Okay, so for our discussion here, again, welcome. We're so excited to have you here. Again, I mentioned there are about 100 of us on the session today. And what we're trying to do is to talk about successful implementation around state level, but it's also connecting with districts and schools. So the session is going to focus on alignment strategies and the use of evaluation to determine alignment opportunities. Specifically, there's 3 objectives we hope to accomplish. One is that participants will be able to identify what it means to align key initiatives and why alignment is important. Second objective is participants will learn strategies for effective and efficient alignment of key initiatives. And finally, participants will learn ways to evaluate and align opportunities and outcomes. So what our vision for this, as Justin and I were talking, is that we really hoped it would be a discussion, that we are going to ask questions of each other. We've got some slides. All the slides that we would have used in a typical session are uploaded under files. You can download those. What you'll see if you download, there's a number of questions that Justin and I will be asking each other. And what our intent is to say, you've been doing Zoom a whole lot during this year and a half during the pandemic. And we wanted to try to break things up a little bit to provide some interaction between what we're doing and for this discussion. But we also, because we have the chat and we're unable to open up and hear folks talk, but we want to provide opportunity within the chat that you can interact with us as well. So I'm going to stop sharing here and want to start out and introduce you to Justin. And Justin, could you talk a little bit about yourself and what you bring into this idea of alignment?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you. My name is Justin Pbis. I work with the State Education Agency in Washington State, and my role here is MTSS Director. And the way it's positioned in our state agency is in a small department that's kind of disconnected in a sense from a lot of the larger departments like special ed and Title I and stuff. But what the intention of our department is kind of this hub and spoke model, that we're a hub connecting other departments and kind of guiding work that touches a lot of departments, which is how MTSS came to kind of be housed in my department, or in the department I belong to. Prior to working here, I was in Wisconsin and was part of the Wisconsin RTI Center for about a decade, helping to support MTSS and Pbis implementation across the state, with an amazing team of colleagues there that are still hard at work. So thank you, and thank you for allowing us to kind of change it up a little bit. I was joking with Steve a couple of weeks ago that it doesn't look like he's left that classroom for a couple of years, so hoping that it's an opportunity for him to engage in some conversation in the process. So Steve, can you give a little of your background?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Justin. I've been implementing multi-tier system support for going on 21 years now within the state of Michigan here. We're connected with Michigan Department of Education. And as Justin mentioned, nobody does this alone, right? It's the wonderful work that the teams provide, and the support from administration, and most importantly, it's the people implementing in the field. So we've got the great opportunity to work with fabulous people. And throughout all this work, I think we've learned along the way that you can do things the hard way, which we often do, or we can really look at how to make it easier, more efficient, more effective. And alignment is such a critical component of that. So this is just a great opportunity that we wanted to set the stage for you all. So again, as we are talking, please feel free to add things in for the chat, or and questions or comments, and we'd be happy to bring that up as well. So what we, as I mentioned, we're going to try to do this by more discussion. There's going to be times that we want to actually show you some of the slides that we have to illustrate the points we're making. But all our slides are available for the files to download. But again, we're going to be trying to do more of a discussion to explain deeper of what we're trying to accomplish. So I'd like to start out with a question for you, Justin. If you, because we're talking about alignment of key initiatives, could you take a minute really to talk about what does alignment mean to you?
Yeah, I think I think of alignment as a verb, like something that we have to actually invest time and energy into as an action. But when I think of alignment, I think of having defined goals and then carefully choosing the strategies and the structures that are going to get us to those goals, so that everything that we're doing is connected to a common set of goals, and then we're choosing strategies that have common logic, have common language, having common procedures or processes to get us closer to that goal, so that we're reducing redundancy, we're reducing competition, duplication, and we're doing some of the sense making of why are we doing these things and how do they fit together to get to a common goal. So I think that would be my elevator speech, if you will, of what is alignment, or what does it mean to me. What would you add to that, Steve?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We're hearing a lot about alignment nowadays, right? And how we should align all our efforts. And it makes sense when you're talking about what you just said, Justin, that, you know, if we want to be more effective and efficient, I put that two words into one. If we want to do that together, we have to make sure we've set up systems for it. I'm wondering, as we're talking about this, do you think there's a possibility that either you're aligned or not, or do you see it more as a continuum, or what's your thoughts?
It's a good question. I do think it's a continuum. There's probably a yes and no to it as well, but I do think there's a continuum to it. And some of the work that we're doing right now, like to emphasize that idea of a continuum, is within our SEA, we've been doing some data collection and support around some of the common language and messaging, and how aligned are we in our language? How aligned are we in how we're messaging certain things? So, for example, we recently did a survey across our agency staff to ask, pick a guidance document, a PowerPoint, a training, something that you kind of have developed or have ownership over within your role. And we gave them this survey and asked, does it mention MTSS? Does it mention teaming? Does it mention tiers? Does it mention data? And then, if they answered yes, then there are additional questions underneath there. But I think, like, across all of the survey responses we got, there were, it has teams, but it doesn't have data. It has tiers, but it doesn't have teams. It has, right? Like, so we're aligned in different ways, and, or to different extents. And we're really just looking at kind of the language of alignment and not the processes and the infrastructure to make that happen. So I think there's quite a bit more to look at besides just that. So for that reason, I would argue, I think alignment kind of happens along a continuum, and is not just kind of a yes, no, black, white kind of thing. What do you think? Do you agree with that? What would you add?
Yeah, I totally agree. What's interesting when I think about alignment, we have a lot of potholes here in Michigan because of the weather and everything, right? So I could have my car aligned and I'm driving along, and there are factors that influence alignment, right? I hit that pothole, now I'm out of the line and everything. And I think the same thing that you're getting at is we could be working on a continuum, and then there could be something that knocks us out of a line that we need to go back in and regroup and revisit and look at how we can, affect those factors. So yeah, I think it's a continuum for that.
You hit the pothole and you get turnover, you get a new initiative or a new grant or whatever, right? I think those are all things that can affect some of that alignment as well. I agree.
Now when you're talking about alignment, how do you see it? It fit in with, we hear a lot about integration, alignment and integration. Do you see those as the same, or how do you see those as connected?
Yeah, I think of integration as like one effort. Like we have one way of doing things, or one set of kind of steps of how we do things to encompass multiple efforts, whereas alignment is maybe more, we have a common set of processes, but they may not be one set of processes, or a common way, a common set of structures, but we might still be doing things separately at times. So I see integration as probably ideally the next step to alignment. Like if we get alignment, but then integration is actually doing all the work as a single effort, much more so. So I don't know, do you disagree?
So it's almost like a continuum where I look at integration, and if you're going to do integration, it has to be aligned, or else it doesn't fit for. But you can do alignment without necessary integration, right?
Yeah.
Example, we're going to align our PBIS training with our reading training, for example. And what we might be aligning is to make sure that we are talking about that core components about each. We're looking at certainly the looking at data collection. We're looking at a team to lead the work, but it's aligned in the language, but it may not be integrated, meaning that it may not be the same team who's looking at data,
Right.
or
Yeah.
the same team attending the training. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. Why would you say alignment is important at the state level?
Yeah, so what I think about that is at the state level, what we're finding is if we're going to be effective in alignment, we need to make sure that we have alignment taking place where policy and funding and budgets and mandates all kind of connect, and that cannot take place in the classroom. And it's sometimes really hard at a district, right? Because of these funding and mandates. So for us at a state level, we can start looking at how to navigate that and provide guidance and support, and to also pursue things that are more aligned for the receivers ultimately at the end. So I think it's really important. Are you seeing similar things for your work?
Yeah, the funding, when you said the funding, probably like 10 years ago, Rob Horner said, like align at the source of funding, where the funding comes together. And, it probably took me 10 years to kind of comprehend that, in terms of like, we have a lot of funding streams like here at the SEA that come together here. And when we roll those out separately with different expectations, different language, different things, I think it sows confusion to our districts and our schools of, well, are we supposed to do this, or are we supposed to do this? And if we do this, does that interfere with this? And like just a couple examples, we have dyslexia legislation, discipline reform policies, early childhood supports, mental health supports, attendance, SEL, all these things. And if we're not doing some of that sense making here, but we're creating the expectations that schools and districts do the work, I feel like, we have about 300 districts in the state. We potentially go from like having, say, 6 departments do some intentional alignment work to having 300 districts have to figure that out, right? So if we can do some of that sense making here, then 300 districts maybe don't have to do quite as much. And we make life easier and hopefully more manageable for districts in that regard. And one of the things, this is I even have it on my whiteboard here. I have a drawing. I'm wondering if maybe you can talk about this, from practices to structures, and the further we get away from kids, how some of that changes, and where alignment falls on that continuum as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we have been kind of talking, and Justin, I think we're talking about the same thing here, that the closer you are to kids, the more you really need to be focusing on specific practices. What are those evidence-based practices to help a kid read better, to have better social, emotional, behavioral outcomes? The further you're away from kids at the school level, at the district, at the regional, or at the state, we're looking at how important it is to support those who support kids. And the alignment that we see is part of that support. So certainly at a district, we need to make sure that we're aligned to support the educators so they know what to do. At the state, there's so much more other variables that impact it. And Justin, I don't know if you could see, good to see you, Jill, virtually here, and you're just saying, agreeing with some of the work that Justin was saying. Eva, you bring up a interesting point here around the silos in the work and how that connects with, some of the issues around barriers and alignment. And I just want to mention a friend of ours, Hank Bohannon, talks about silos and the connection with this. And I think there has a good point around the alignment. He is suggesting that if you use the analogy of grain elevators, so you might have a silo of grain that would be millet and some that would be wheat and corn and others. And what is nice is you need the integrity of that, because you don't want to mix it up. But the important part where we need to align and integrate is down at the users. So at that point, they want bread. They don't want to have all these separate things, right? So at the user point, we really need to align. If we take that same idea at our state structures, at least some of the work that we have been involved with, it's really important to have those distinct groups, because funding is separate for IDEA than Title I, right? So we need to have integrity around some of the use of funds. But what's really important for the alignment or integration, if we're doing it really well, is down at the point of the users, and that's where the bread should be made.
Yeah.
So Eva, I'm glad you brought it up. So thank you.
So Gordon asked, are we saying that alignment is silos that are in parallel? What do you think?
It's interesting. I see alignment as something. It could be that, but I think it's more of if we truly are looking at alignment issues, it's not only the silos could be separate. If you're using that analogy, right? They're separate. They could be located at different places, and they may not even influence one another. The alignment, in my mind, there has to be a strong connection that, for example, if we are aligning training, a silo could be that we have training for the reading, as I mentioned, and training for the behavior. Alignment would be to make sure that they're sequenced carefully. And it's also alignment would be that they are provided at times that are reasonable for the end user. So it's not like you have to go to the reading training on Monday and Tuesday you go to. So that would be a completely parallel silo in my mind. But and Gordon, I'm curious what you think too as you bring this up. We got smart people online here, so it's great to see the connections.
So Jill says alignment is an essential coherence-making strategy for those inside the organization, and especially for the outside user.
Yeah. Jill, you bring up such a good point too. I think there's some nuances around alignment that's interesting in my mind. I don't think everything is worth aligning, and I think things that are much more important. So when we consider that, I think it's the priority of initiatives. If it's a high priority, if it's mandated, if it's a requirement, at the state or federal, we should be really considering how to align. If it's not, then we have to consider other things like the maturity of the initiative. For example, if we have something that is established, if we've been doing PBIS for a long time, and then we have a brand new initiative that is trying to also look at social emotional behavioral, but it's just starting out, and it's not stable enough because there could be changeover in staff, or they're still trying to figure out what their training component may be. We have to consider, I think, before investing, to make sure, is it ready that we can move forward? Because if we go ahead and align it at that point, it may be changing overnight, and we have to go back and redo all our work.
Do you feel, Steve, that kind of along that continuum you're talking about, from the state to the district to the school to the classroom, do you feel like we move more from alignment to integration sometimes along that continuum as well?
It could be. I think I've seen some districts doing some really nice integration of their work, and they're integrating around the teaming, they're integrating around the data collection, they're integrating around the professional learning at the district level to support it. Ultimately, I think it's difficult as an educator to try to align and integrate all these things, because I'm trying to support my kids, and I don't know what your requirements are, from a leadership, or I don't know what the funding requirements. So help me out so I can do it better. But that's what I'm thinking. What?
Yeah, well, I think like teachers don't get to, like, we might have a reading training and a behavior training or PBIS training or something, but the teacher doesn't get to separate reading instruction from behavioral instruction in the classroom. So, what it sparks for me is, along that continuum, we're constantly getting, as we're getting closer to the practices, really looking to make sure we're integrating practices that make sense to integrate, at least.
And I think it's even fascinating, because we're talking about alignment, like kind of different initiatives, right? The literacy initiative, the behavior. I'm even seeing it right in a specific content area. So within a reading, there could be, here's a training for reading on this day, and then you go to this other thing, and they could be saying different techniques or strategies. And so it's a continuum, as you said.
Who do you think should be leading the work of alignment?
Yeah, so in my mind, so I'll give you an example of a non-example to begin with, and how we try to change it. So we're working with a large district, and they were trying to align all their behavioral support initiatives. So they have PBIS, they have restorative practices, they have social emotional learning, and a number of different things. So in that meeting, we were talking about how important it is to align, and they said, yeah, this is great. We need to do that, because we've got, I think they had 14, 15, 16 different initiatives. As we started talking, we said, we got the right people there in the fact that they were in charge of each of those initiatives. They were the ones who could allocate resources. They're the ones who make the decisions on what people should do and attend, and the requirements. The difficulty is we were missing the point that they could see the big picture, because they were in control of each of those offices that were doing that work. They did not have the understanding at their level of what the specific practices were. So when we talk about aligning, they didn't understand what was the key component of PBIS that could be aligned with restorative practices or aligned with social emotional learning. They just looked at the bigger program. So we were looking at, then we need to have people who can control, who've got the big ideas, but also those who understand the practices well enough, what the research says, what the practical applications are.
So the authority, as well as kind of the content expertise, coming together to support the alignment. What does that look like for you in Michigan, kind of within the MyMTSS TA Center, and your engagement with your state agency, your state ed agency?
Yeah, so fortunately, and this just happened in the last few years, we've got wonderful folks at the Michigan Department of Ed who've been really trying to align cross initiatives. So I'll give a shout out to Liz Newell, who's been leading this work at our state. She has been bringing together a leadership team that would look at those who are in charge of MTSS with our school aid funds, and those who are providing field services, teacher prep, and bringing folks in and together. And so we meet monthly, and there's discussion on what are you working on now? What are key things that we should be contributing? And what are those things that we may need to get out of the way so you can do your job better? We're not interfering. And to me, that's all alignment with that. Are you
Nice.
seeing anything similar with?
Yeah, so we have two teams here in our SEA that we're trying to do some of that alignment work with, and you know, we've got a long ways to go to get it all sorted out and, you know, smooth. But one of our teams, I think, kind of like you were just saying, Steve, we have what we've kind of dubbed as a state design team, and from the NERN work, you know, like I'll quote what NERN says about a state design team. The primary purpose of the state design team is to bring together leaders of the state's major departments and other stakeholders to develop a shared approach to implementation that aligns system functioning within SEA goals and outcomes. So we have, I don't know, give or take 10 people represented on this team, and we meet monthly, and it's directors from different departments to talk about some of what you're saying. What are we doing, and what are we maybe overlapping, competing in some areas on? But I think, like, we still have a lot of work to do as far as the like, what are we going to stop doing, and what do we, you know, build more intentionality around, even to say, like, oh, we're talking about SEL, you know, this is fits within your MTSS teams, and, you know, like, helping to make the connection to where, you know, use a common set of practices or teams or processes to do the work. So trying to do some of that. And then the other thing that we have is we have what we're calling an implementation team. And this is cross-departmental. It's 6 or so departments in the agency. And we have special ed and Title I and school improvement and different efforts represented. And what we're trying to do there is provide some coaching within the agency around some of that messaging, and how do we get a little bit more concrete about what we're sending out into the field so that it's going out in an aligned manner. So that team meets every 2 weeks, and we're trying to do more like boots on the ground work of helping to facilitate the alignment that happens from the SEA to regions and districts.
So it's that communication across is so important. It's modeling, it's providing the support. And so Justin, I don't know if you can see some of the chat. So Eva is saying it's describing current work, and I know she was referring earlier. Amy, you're saying several of your schools have experienced needing, or at least feeling like they need, separate teams or subset of teams when certain initiatives are coming on board. And then they get up and running, they're able to combine teams under one umbrella of social, emotional, behavioral climate. So have you seen similar things, Justin, with your work?
That's a great comment. I don't know. I have to think on that for a second. So I feel like right now a lot of our teaming structures, at least, are not integrated. So I think what we're trying to do is show the connection and show how, you know, where you have 3 teams, how can we how can we kind of collapse some of these efforts into one team? And maybe there's subcommittees from that team, but we have that communication like you were just talking about, Steve, and we have some of the common practices and overall overarching goals and data look, but some of the support that rolls out might happen from a subset of the team.
Right.
What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think, Amy, you bring up a good point of how people are used to working, or what is the culture of it. And then, it's always in my mind, how do we get traction? How do we move forward? So if people are used to working separate teams, I'm happy to get movement in one direction anyway. And it's exciting that they're looking at it. But over time, we help people to see, well, yeah, we've got separate teams, but the same person is on all three, or, so we're looking at how do we make it more efficient, along the way. And that's where I think that's what you're getting at too, is you can get up and running and able to combine teams. So I think that's important. So I'm wondering, Justin, could you talked about what you're doing with communication support. Can you talk about some strategies that you have for aligning, like the process you actually use? And
I can try. I mean, I mean, we're in the mix of this, I think, like anyone else. Just an hour ago on one of these state design team meetings, we were talking about looking at an initiative inventory and collecting some baseline data there to really get a sense of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to go about aligning, trying to, the hope being to develop a problem of practice that we can all come together and focus on. I think structurally it's challenging within the SEA, and I don't know if others have this experience, but we're not structurally organized, I think, to be a highly efficient or highly aligned kind of organization. So often we're aligned by we're organized by our funding. And what I really aim to move toward is, can we get aligned on some goals and then kind of work backwards? What strategies will we engage in, and then how do we fund it, so that we're pulling together the funding kind of at the end, but around common goals? Because I think, especially, like, we have a lot of grants and stuff that come in through the SEA, and I think we tend to, we get the funds, and obviously with any new funding there's specific deliverables expected of that. But then I think we tend to develop strategies around the deliverables and around the funding, and then determine our outcomes. And I just think we need to flip that upside down. Like, here's the outcomes, here's the strategies, and even when we're applying for grants, here's how, if we apply for that grant, here's how it fits into this broader effort. And I think at the district level as well as the state level, there's a bit of a mindset shift in that.
Absolutely. And I love what you just said. We should have an end in mind. And the end in mind is we want certainly outcomes for students, but to get there, we need to make sure we've got efficient systems that support teachers to do it. So here's something that I'd be curious what you think. I'm going to share something just a minute, if I can see if it'll work. So you should be seeing my screen here, right?
Yes.
So when we start thinking about what's interesting for us for alignment is kind of like you hear, there's the skill and the will. Is there a will to align, and then do we have the skill or know how to do it, and the technical part of it. So some of the thoughts that we have for starting out is that there's perception, like there's different programs going on, and that's what they do and that's what we do, and we don't want to connect with them because they're doing it wrong and we're doing it right, or they're competing with us, or we just don't believe in what they're doing. So one thing that we see as perception is, well, and this is just an example. So it may be one group, we are using explicit approach, we are using specific research base, specific required measures, and they're doing a discovery approach. They're using an eclectic research base, and they're using self-selected measures. So we look at that and say, there's no way we can even align or get along because they are so different. But when we start, going through this process with our teams or the people we're working with, we start looking at it and say that, the reality is probably there's only about 15% of issues, and I'm just making up that as percentage, but there's probably the vast majority that we're agreeing on. It's the little things on the outside that may be different. So, for example, we all agree that successful students are important, successful educators are important, differentiating supports, meaning that one size doesn't fit all. We agree that we should have some outcome measures. We agree that we need information to get better. We need to use effective practices. And the reason I bring that up is, as a starting point, if we are going to look at, trying to align, let's look at the commonalities that to say, no, there are some things that we can really align on. And I just saw in here that Gordon said, do the differences complement each other? I'm going to add on, I'm going to back up here a minute to this process. So we start out with that perception to say, there are things that we agree on, there are things that we're different. And Gordon, I agree that there could be ways that we could strengthen that. So for us, we actually sat down with a team for it, and we said, okay, there's a couple different initiatives. One would be in that more explicit approach I mentioned, one's more discovery. And we are going to kind of consider philosophical engagement, or what is our theory of action, or what is our whole approach to doing this? What is the focus of our work, which would be our purpose? We look at the activities that are associated with it. We look at measures and evaluation and targeted outcomes. So when we did this, we looked at one group and, for example, philosophical engagement. The idea was they're going to facilitate installation of district systems, building routines aligned to evidence of practice and responsive to context. So they're going in, working with a district that is struggling or wanting to improve, and they're going to facilitate through the systems. We would go in and we're focusing on explicit and direct facilitation of practices with contextualization. So again, it's saying one size doesn't fit all. Our common ground is we build local capacity to support effective practices, context matters, but the conflicts is when they're talking about discovery, we're talking about directive approach, and the receivers, and especially if we're both in the same district, are saying, wait a minute, you're telling us one thing, somebody else is telling us something different. We don't know what to do. How are we going to align that? So what we may do, and this is getting back, I think, from what Gordon, you're suggesting, is it could be helpful for us, and this is what we agreed on, let's define and clarify conditions when the discovery approach or the directive approach should be occurring. So how can we, and you think about the benefits of how they might complement each other. Discovery approaches, if I'm figuring it out, I could get bought in and because I feel like ownership, like it's, I'm discovering that this is really important for us, as opposed to somebody from outside telling me, what to do. But somebody from outside telling me what to do could be really focusing on the research that evidence-based. So again, they could complement each other. So Gordon, I was just trying to connect with what you were saying through.
And Jody said in the chat, I think of this as moving from us versus them to the we. Mm-hmm. We are really working on value-based work as a foundation for identifying both individual and group interests. And I think it can really inform integration aspects.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Very nice.
And we have something like that going on in Washington here, where we have some priority around high community engagement of integrated student supports, and we have MTSS, and in some places those are being viewed as competing. And what we're trying to do is a lot of that same work to say like look at all the overlap, and we all agree on these common things, that we want to serve the needs of every student, we want to engage our community, we want to build the capacity of our staff and local environment or context to do this work. And here's where they're the same. So there's a lot of that same outcome, same values. Here's where they're a little different, but here's where they can actually complement each other and make each other stronger, not like be in competition with one another in how we do it. And so I agree with Gordon and Jody in terms of like, on the surface, it is being viewed by some as like this or this. And what we're trying to say is like, it doesn't have to be one or the other, but if we do them in a really aligned and integrated manner, it can make everything better, stronger.
Absolutely. So Justin, I know you have some wonderful slides. Do you mind sharing some of your thoughts of what you have here?
Sure, let me pull them up.
And as you're doing that, Eva was just talking about the technical guide for alignment of initiatives, programs, and practices, and school district has been a good resource. It alleviated some, but not all of the competing initiative mindset. Can you share additional resources with Continuum? So I know, Justin, you're going to be sharing some of your ideas for it. Amy, you said that's what you've worked on with restorative practices and approaches in Vermont. You really believe the restorative principles, which coincide with equity constructs and can make PBIS better. The systems and data from PBIS can make restorative approaches stronger. So I think you're hitting on exactly. None of us have the answer, but together we certainly have a part of the solution, right? So, and I can see your screen now, Justin.
All
Thank
right,
you.
sounds good. So these are just a handful of things like within Washington that in one way or another actually directly call out MTSS. And these are priorities, some of these are legislation, various different efforts, but I feel like without us doing integration, kind of naming some of these things and calling out and finding where we align and integrate some of the efforts, I worry that a district is going to see this as, in this case, 11 siloed, very different and often competing efforts. And they're not intended to be. And if we have a good system and we have ways of kind of doing school, if you will, that I think are grounded in our core components of MTSS, then I think the integration becomes a lot easier too. Like, oh, look at this group of teams, or look at this database or the data set or the data that we're looking at some of the practices that we're engaging in and supporting. Let's look at how we're engaging families and community and students. So I feel our 5 kind of defined components of MTSS in Washington are teams, data, family, student, community engagement, the tiers, and the selection and use of evidence-based practices. And I feel like if we can do some of that alignment work here, and ideally some of the integration here at the SEA, it makes it easier to get to more integration. We're integrating our data, our teams, our professional development at the school level, that kind of thing. And this is an example of where I think we need to go from alignment to integration. And so this is my daughter's notebook in 7th grade, and we went to meet the teacher night at the beginning of the school year, and she, every class, it was kind of beautiful. We went to every class and they're like, your kid needs a binder and it needs 5 tabs. And the first tab is homework. And the second tab is this. And the third tab is this. And there's tons of consistency across all of her classes. But what I felt was the problem is we didn't get to integration in how these things were being moved into practice. So what happened is my kids got about 32 seconds to get on the bus after the bell rings. And she's got 6 binders that all have the first tab being homework. So she's got to flip through all 6 of those to find what she needs to take home for homework on the bus. And that's where I think like it's very aligned. It was aligned across all of her classes, but it wasn't integrated. And I felt like, the integration in this example is like having an agenda that she carries to all 6 of her classes and uses throughout the day, so that at the end of the day, she can look at that and it builds that efficiency, that effectiveness. So that was just one kind of way that I think alignment is good, but alignment is not enough oftentimes. I want to skip over this real quick. And then some of the other things that we're doing is my friend Kelsey Schmitz, who was in my role for more or less before I came, when I moved here, she's like, we have 31 flavors of MTSS in the state. So, some of the efforts that we've taken on are getting to some common language, some common definitions, so that as we're looking across efforts and across initiatives that go out of the agency into districts, we're speaking common language, we're saying the same thing, so that at least when they hear MTSS or if it's Pbis, they're not hearing competing or discrepant kind of things directly from the agency. So we've engaged in a lot of effort of coming to some common language, some common reference in how we talk about it. And then we've done some lunch and learn kind of things within the agency where we, people are just welcome to come. And, we're just going to unpack what these components are and what that looks like back in your department, in your work. And then we've done some follow-up from those as well. So a couple efforts that we've engaged in to try to align. Yeah, go for it.
For this example, people are coming with the idea of trying to align. Like these are people that are working to align, right?
Trying to learn more about kind of the language and the concepts. And then, so that was like the first part. And then the second part was, how does this connect to your work and how do we get intentional about the alignment to this work? And the most recent thing that we've been working on, I don't even know if I have a slide of it. Yeah, here, is we put out a survey that we called a guidance alignment survey. So different types of guidance that have gone out of the agency. We asked people to really reflect on that. And where the alignment was within their guidance to the language and the concepts of MTSS. And then from there, we had questions, they could rate the extent of alignment. And it was just, self-reflection, tried to make it like, we're collecting information and looking to be able to support you. There's not wrong answers here. But then at the end were questions of, would you like someone from the implementation team to sit down with you and, support you in alignment? And we asked a question in the survey, do you see opportunities in your document, in your training, whatever, for more alignment? And a number of people said yes. So we're trying to follow up with each of those people, as well as the people that have asked us to reach out and just offer support for how we do some of that alignment. And then what we want to do is take this survey and so the survey is reflective right now. It's a reflective activity, and we want to move it into more of a proactive, like, I don't know if it'll be a checklist or something, but where like you're getting ready to put some guidance out, here are some things to consider in writing that guidance to be really intentional about aligning before you start and as you're developing it. And you may not hit all the components of MTSS deeply, but you may reference them or you may link to them so people see when they read this guidance, they see how it connects back to this kind of broader effort of MTSS implementation.
Wonderful.
So,
So what I'm thinking, going back to what Eva was saying, that what are some example or other resources? What I'm hearing, Justin, is you gave some examples of how you are contextualizing the resources or contextualizing the process within your group, and I'm finding that similar, certainly in Michigan, that we are relying on creating our own ideas of how to align. Maybe I can share another example here as well. Sorry, it's just taking me a minute to get the slide, and then. So again, this is getting back to your question of additional resources, and like Justin, we have been trying to look at what resources are out there, but also things that we can create to help align. So I think you were mentioning this guide, right? The Technical Assistance for Alignment from the Pbis Center. And this certainly has been a wonderful tool, and it will walk you through the steps, like step by step of how to align with different initiatives. Other tools are resources that we have created that help us out. One is we created a document we call value added. And this may be helpful for states or for districts as well. And what we do is we list out all the things that you have to be doing within your district or that the state has to do. So for example, if there's legislation that's saying, or school board policy, we have something around anti-bullying legislation that schools need to have a anti-bullying policy. We have a read by third grade policy. We have discipline to reduce the use of seclusion and restraint. So we list those things, and then we add in how we are contributing to that work. And what we're doing is we're setting the stage to say, you have to do these things. Here's how our project is aligned with those key initiatives, and we can help you to align with that as well, because we're adding value. And that's where we're talking about for value added. And this has been helpful for people to look that we're just not coming in doing things. We are trying to help you to do what you have to be doing anyway. Another example is that, so when our new governor came in, she had her education plan, and we listed out the key components of the education plan. And then we said, here's our current MTSS supportive elements, what we're doing that supports it directly. And here's the opportunity that we could even enhance that or other elements. So again, it's listing out those key priorities that are from administration. And then we're trying to connect it with the work we're doing as well. And certainly the PBIS evaluation blueprint has some ideas for aligning. So I'm going to stop here again. And Justin, do you see other things in the chat that we should be talking about?
I saw Amy ask for that checklist or guidance when it's created. Happy to share that once we get there. I'm wondering, Steve, if you can talk a little bit more about evaluation and how evaluation helps with our alignment.
Yeah. So I think you said it so well starting out, Justin, is why are we even aligning, right? We shouldn't be aligning in my mind. just because somebody says align, we should be, because it's action oriented, outcome focus. So for evaluation, I'd like to start, and I think you were saying that at the beginning, what should be the outcome? Well, the outcome is one, we should have better outcomes for our students. We should have teachers who can implement better. We should implement the practices with fidelity, so that'd be a measure of it. We should have perception by educators, by family, that things are better. So in my mind, if we start out to say, what are those overall things? If we are able to measure that before, and then we look at our lining, trying to combine it and keep measuring those things, that should help us to, connect it and, make sure we're on the right path. And how have you been evaluating?
Well, one of the things that we're working on right now, I'd be curious to know what other agencies or other states kind of look like in this regard. But we have like a centralized, state student outcome database, right? But we don't. All of the data prior to that is not connected. So, I have access to like the TFI data and the reading TFI data and the DCA and stuff, but not everyone does in our agency to be able to look at some of the implementation data. But then when we look at our actions and our strategies and what some of our inputs are, what we tend to do is, whether it's my department and we have training that we're training we have 28 districts in our first cohort, like that data is sitting in our kind of Excel docs and desktops and stuff. And we have a really big effort on inclusionary practices with special ed. And all of that is sitting in the special ed department on their, Excel docs or whatever they're using, and school improvement, and like
They
across the
don't
agency, all
Yeah.
those systems don't talk to each other. And what I feel is sometimes we're competing even for the priority, or that like, oh, here's a grant or here's something, we're going to invite districts, but we don't actually know what all the district is already engaged in. So we're in the process of developing a database right now that one of my hopes is we would be able to get like I've kind of been referring to it like a baseball card view of a district, and we could see from across the agency the different strategies and efforts and initiatives and stuff that we're supporting as an agency that a district is connected to. And I think that helps us in any support that we're providing to help make connections for the districts. And it also helps us to get a more global view of what's going on and where we may choose not to invite a district into something because they've got so much going on already, or which districts are we maybe not touching as much in our support as well. Maybe we do more outreach there. But then, so to take all those strategies, the inputs, connect them to the implementation data that we have and any implementation data other departments have, and then connect that to the outcome data. So we can kind of look along our logic model within a database and say, if we do this, schools and districts do this, students benefit this way, and we can not just look at all of that within our own kind of siloed work, So we'll see how it goes, but we've been working as a kind of cross-agency team to develop some of the data elements that we would like in there, and what are some of the things that other departments collect that we would want to house in that database, so that we can try to become more efficient and effective in what we do, how we do it, and to whom we support. So that's a strategy we're working on.
You said some real powerful things in there. You always do, but what I like about what you just said is, one is, look for the opportunities. So the opportunity is you're already collecting some data. How do you build upon that, right? Another thing you said was to say not, some districts have so many things going on. And the session just before this, Susan Barrett was talking about deselecting practices. And we've got a lot on our plate, right? We're trying to do so much. How do we remove some of this so that we can really align and focus on the important work moving on? And the third thing that I thought was really powerful you're saying is, we need to work together. We need to step back, look at what we're trying to accomplish, look at our colleagues into this and move forward with it. So I appreciate that. I'm wondering, as we're moving forward here, what do you wish you knew in starting your journey with alignment? That if you only knew it then instead of now.
I wish I knew you, Steve. I've learned a lot over the years from you, so I appreciate it. I feel like every day I'm learning, right? Like there's so much that I still don't know, and some of it is just steady plodding, right? Just kind of going a day at a time to figure it out. But two things that really do come to my mind that I wish I knew was being really intentional about starting with the end in mind. What are the outcomes that we're trying to accomplish? And then the other one, we've been engaged in some work with implementation science, improvement science with the Carnegie Foundation. And one of their principles, the first principle of improvement science, is to make the work problem specific and user-centered. And the idea of that user-centered kind of philosophy is see the problem through the eyes of the user. And I think of like schools and districts being the user. And if we step back and we view education and view the support from the state through the eyes of a school, through the eyes of a teacher, I think it gives us a very different perspective of what we're doing and how we should, the importance of alignment, the importance of language, the importance of efficiency, and so often we align based on what we've got going on, but we're aligning through a kind of our vantage point. And I think we need to change the vantage point around the alignment and really think about schools, teachers, districts, etc. So
Absolutely.
Those are a couple of mine. How about you? I mean, you've been doing this a lot longer than me, and
That's the old guy.
I've learned a lot from you.
Well, I think what's interesting, right? Because starting out, when you're young and naive, and I'm thinking, I don't need to align anything. I'm doing the great work. I don't. And the reality is that's so naive, right? That we could be doing great work, but it's better when we are doing it together. So that's part of the thing I wish I knew then, that take advantage of alignment and make it better for the kids and educators. I think another thing I learned is that it's hard work. Alignment isn't easy, and you want to make sure that you do make it better. And so the evaluation part, I think, is so critical moving forward. I think the other thing that we mentioned, interspersed throughout this, not everything. I think not everything is ready for alignment, or should be. If things are again questionable with the science, or doesn't produce outcomes we want, I don't know necessarily if I want to put a lot of effort into aligning that as compared to, because it takes so much work, I want to focus on other things to align. So those are just some thoughts here. I know we have about 5 minutes left. I'm wondering, again, because there's such great folks on the line, if there's other questions that anyone would like to bring up or comments that we might have missed during our discussion.
While we're waiting for something to hopefully to come in the chat box, one thing I would add on to what you just said is I think it's important to align our implementation strategies. Like, so much of how we structure our MTSS support is like this cascade of support from the region to the district to the school to the classroom, some of the data collection and stuff like that. And I think it's not just aligning the what of the content or the language, but also the how and how we roll out efforts and use what we know from implementation science in that process.
I always appreciate what Rob Horner said about that, looking at the different levels of that cascade. He's saying, at the student, it's our level of analysis, right? We should be looking at, are we making an impact? The school is a level of implementation because we do school-wide approaches. So we should be aligning, those school-wide approaches there. The education agency, LEA, that's where we have a level of management resources. So we want to make sure we're aligning, across that and providing support. And the state is where we can align coordination efforts, through that all. So I think that hits on what you're saying is stages of implementation for those, but we'll also look at, the level of cascade.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see Samantha's?
Yeah, so can you describe your process and structures around convening SEA and LEA level leadership teams?
I was going to leave that for you. So what do you have?
What we're doing is, some of our effort here is we have, so that cascade that Steve was just talking about, we have a couple of different leadership teams at the SEA, and then we have ESDs, educational service districts, that are regional agencies. So we have a team that we've built of representatives from all of those agencies that are the primary conduit to district teams. So we have a couple kind of layers of overlap on the teams before the districts. And then when we're providing support to the districts, we're really using that ESD team and bringing district teams together around PD. And the cohort model that we're using right now is, in a way, it's like a three-tiered approach. So we have statewide professional development for our entire cohort. And then we have regional. We're taking that 28 districts that we have in the cohort this year, and we're breaking them into smaller regional cohorts to dig deeper, to contextualize the implementation more. And then the ESD person within that region is doing district level support to the district leadership team. So trying to bring the teams together along a cascade in that way is really our primary strategy right now. How about you, Steve? We have about 2 minutes left.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. The only thing I would add is when we're looking at this, we connected also to stakeholder, right? We want input overall to say what's working, what's not, of those we're working with and those that we want to work in the future. I think the other thing is we create a process for barrier busting. So we identify a barrier and say, how do we push it up the system to find out who can help support in that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're at about time. We appreciate everyone's time and willingness to join us in a session that's maybe a little outside the box and how we tried to approach it. I hope that worked for people. And, by all means, feel free to reach out to either of us. I can put my email in the chat box for anyone that would like it.
And we've got the session evaluation. You should be seeing it on the screen. And Justin, again, I learned so much from you every time I got the great opportunity. So thank you. And Damon, thank you so much for your all the behind the scenes support and technical assistance as well.
Agreed.
Thank you. Great session.
All right.
Thank you
Thank you,
all.
everyone. Have a great rest of the conference.
Goodbye.